vividly recreate the past through computation, to the point where you could actually know who did what, when people did things, and that, I mean, I don't even know if this would be physical. Today, certainly not be possible, but with the exponential increase in computational power and technology and innovation, that one day we'll reach a point where you'll be able to watch, you'll be able to see what happened, and they'll be able to recreate what happened exactly. And that this would be something that would be, it's impossible for us to imagine that someone would be able to do that right now.
Yeah.
But that one day with technology, as it gets more and more advanced, we will reach some sort of some innovation or some sort of an invention that will allow us to go back and see, literally see what happened, how things were done.
Technology is changing our whole understanding of the past, and what you're envisaging is perfectly possible. We will come to a time, if we
100 years, 500 years.
Perhaps less. Yeah. If we don't, first destroy ourselves entirely as a civilization, we will come to a time where our cleverness and our techniques will allow a much wider opening up of the past than has presently happened. But it is already happening. One of the areas of science that I go into in America before is genetics and DNA. This is an area of science that was not much informing archaeology until about the 1990s, but since the 2000s has become very important in archaeology, because the technology has been developed where ancient DNA can be extracted and tested, and you can actually genotype an entire individual from DNA that may be 15, 20,000 years old. And this new technology of genome sequencing and DNA is another factor that is raising huge question marks over the past of the Americas. And one of the issues I go into in this book is the presence in the Amazon rainforest of a very specific, clearly identifiable pattern of DNA, which is only found in one other place in the world, and that is in Australasia, in Papua New Guinea, and amongst Australian Aborigines. It's Australasian DNA. Now,
in South America?
Not only in South America, but in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, amongst tribes who've only been contacted in the last 20 or 30 years. And furthermore, although skeletal remains are rare, it has been found in ancient skeletal remains that are close to 11,000 years old in the Amazon. So that tells us that this DNA signal has been in the Amazon for at least 11,000 years. The geneticists think that it came to the Amazon during the last ice age. And this raises a huge mystery, because the peopling of the Americas is supposed to have occurred from Siberia, across the Bering Straits, down through that ice-free corridor into North America, down through North America, into South America, into Central America, and finally into South America. If that was the whole story, then we would find this DNA signal in North America and in Central America. We would not find it only in the Amazon. When I talked to some of the leading geneticists about this, but specifically Professor S.K. Willislev at the University of Copenhagen, who's been the lead author in a number of major studies of ancient DNA. And I asked him, what do you make of this Australasian DNA in the Amazon? And he said, honestly, we don't have a proper explanation for it at the moment. But what he did say is that the most parsimonious explanation, he used that specific word, the most parsimonious explanation is that a group of people during the Ice Age crossed the Pacific Ocean and settled up and ended up in South America and settled in the Amazon and brought their DNA with them. That would account perfectly for the DNA data. And when a scientist says the most parsimonious explanation, what that scientist is saying is he likes that explanation, that it's a simple, direct, clear explanation of the DNA mystery. But then he added, however, it doesn't make practical sense. And I asked him, well, why doesn't it make practical sense? And he said, because the archaeologists tell me that no human population was capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age, at which point it was natural for me to say, do you really trust the archaeologists? And he said, well, in science, we do trust the work of other scientists. We don't really question it. We don't really investigate it. That's their side of the business. And my view is that is rather than taking this weird, anomalous Australasian DNA signal in the heart of the Amazon as something to be explained away, and as something to be for it to be denied that it could be connected to a voyage across the Pacific Ocean. Maybe it's the first compelling evidence that voyages were taking place across the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age. And maybe we should be opening up that whole issue for exploration. And again, I think a lost civilization is the best answer. And that near the end of the Ice Age, when the Younger Dryas cataclysm unfolds, it's not an overnight thing. It's very bad 12,800 years ago. There's about 1,200 years of horror. I don't think the civilization went down in a single day and night. I think there were survivors. I think bits of it were left. I think their project was to restart civilization. And I suggest very strongly that where they tried to mount that project was amongst the hunter-gatherers who coexisted in the world with them at that time. We ourselves are an advanced civilization, at least that's what we call ourselves, and we coexist in the world with hunter-gatherers. It's not an odd idea that an advanced civilization and hunter-gatherers should coexist, and there is separation between us and the Amazonian hunter-gatherers. There are tribes in the Amazon that are uncontacted and that we don't know even exist. If a catastrophe on the level of the Younger Dryas were to occur today, I don't think that our civilization would make it through. We are the spoilt children of the earth. We are just used to having everything laid on. You know, the supermarket shelves are groaning with food. We can get food delivered to our homes. We have roofs over our head. We have shelters. We have clothing. Everything is taken for granted. I guess you're an exception, but very few people in modern Western culture know how to survive. They don't have survival skills. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to gather. They don't know how to grow crops because they've handed that responsibility over to others. We live in a society that's highly segmented and specialized, and different people specialize in different things, but nobody has the vast general survival skill that a hunter-gatherer has. So in a global cataclysm, actually, at first counterintuitively, the people who would survive it would be the hunter-gatherers. And an advanced civilization would be smart, if they were survivors, to seek refuge amongst hunter-gatherers, to make that the place where they might try to restart their civilization. And that's why I think that this Australasian DNA signal in the Amazon may be part of the evidence for a sort of outreach effort that was being made by a lost civilization, seeing the disaster coming down on it and realizing that something needed to be done.
Well, it's fascinating to me that the geneticists would rely on the archaeologists, being that the geneticists have the actual DNA that they can examine, where the archaeologists are piecing things together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little tiny bits of information over the entire landscape. Yeah. And then you consider how much information they don't have access to that's in the ground.
Exactly.
There's so much.
I strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. I don't think it should be described as a science.
What do you think it should be described as?
It's more like a kind of philosophy. It's an attempt to interpret the past based on rather flimsy and limited evidence. And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out.
So the problem is drawing these conclusions and then being too rigid with these conclusions upon the further evidence.
That's my view.
Yeah.
That archaeology has been much too rigid, and that there's a climate of fear in archaeology. I don't mean to pick particularly on archaeologists here. I think this is generally true across other disciplines as well. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers. That's what they build their careers on. If they can get a paper on their bit of research published in Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, etc., that's good for their careers. But then you confront the gatekeepers in those publications who regard any archaeological idea that is not part of the mainstream accepted consensus with great suspicion and are most reluctant to publish that information.
Now, what is the mainstream? When archaeologists talk about seafaring humans, what do they date that to?
Well, the
Polynesians,
yes,
right?
the great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion, and it's a remarkable story, and that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. I first explored this in Fingerprints of the Gods, and I've touched on the mystery again, and I have an appendix on the subject in this book, because I think these are very important. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital, and Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost, all of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there. And the reason there's nothing there, there's another Pinkerton map that shows that. The reason that you'll need to find one that's centered on Antarctica. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place, and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.
Wasn't there also a map of Greenland that showed it underneath the ice?
Yes, there are. And another intriguing thing, I mentioned the Piri-Reis map just now. Shown on the Piri-Reis map, lying off the east coast of North America, is a large island with a row of megaliths, like a road of megaliths, running up the middle of it. That island is in the exact place of the Grand Bahama Banks.
Is this one?
Yeah, it is. But can I point it out to you because
Sure,
the map
sure.
It's there.
That's right there.
That one.
Okay.
It's great that you can bring this up. So this island is sitting there off the southeast coast of North America.
Look at the way they used to draw things back then, too.
And what you see running down the middle of it is this road-like feature of megaliths. I'll point them
Yes,
out
I
again.
see right there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now the thing is, there was a long period of my life when I did a lot of scuba diving, and I was looking at underwater structures, and one of the sites I dived on was the Bimini Road, which is in the Grand Bahama Banks. And the Bimini Road is exactly where that island is. And here's the issue. I don't care whether the Bimini Road is natural or man-made. For me, the mystery is that it is shown above water on that map. And the last time it was above water was thousands and thousands of years ago. So for me, this is all evidence that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that our ancestors had achieved a level of technology where they could explore and map the world's oceans. We shouldn't dismiss that.
There it is
There's-
right there.
there's
So
the
we
Bimini.
don't know what those stones are or how they were created, but boy, do they look artificial.
That's Yonaguni in
Yeah,
Japan
that's
we're looking
Japan.
at now. But
Go back to that image, Jimmy, the last image that we were just looking at. Look at that. I mean,
Yeah.
that looks so man-made.
And you can see that it's rather like the pattern that's shown on the island in the map.
How deep is that today?
Oh, it's not very deep. It's about 20 feet. There's,
But we think that was above water at some point.
it was definitely above water during the last ice age. When it finally went underwater, may have been as late as 8,000 or 9,000 years ago.
Is there anything else compelling that's in the immediate area that seems to indicate that there was some sort of a man-made structure?
Well, nobody's looked for it. And the whole effort of archaeology has been to dismiss the significance of the Bimini Road.
How would they dismiss that?
Well, they say
See,
it's
that
just
to me.
they say it's totally natural.
Come on,
know.
is it? Go back to that image again. Listen, but we'll go
This
back,
is the argument.
Go back to that image that we just saw.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
are you sure?
as somebody who spent a lot of time diving on the Bimini Road, I can tell you I absolutely do not think it's natural. I think it's a man-made structure. But the argument is that it's a kind of beach rock that forms in these blocky formations.
Does it? Is that
Yes, beach rock does form in blocky formation. But here I believe that the beach rock has been used as a construction material. But I repeat, the key issue is not whether the Bimini Road is man-made or not. The key issue is that it features on a map above water. And that is a dating project. That tells us that somebody was mapping that bit of the world when it was above water. And
Jamie,
that
go back to that.
takes us back a long way into the past.
The one that you just pulled up. Yeah, look at that one.
That's a stunning place. It's an amazing sight.
It's just like the odds of that being in that order with those uniformly sized rocks. How long is that?
Oh, hundreds of feet. It's a huge. It's actually shaped like the letter J. It's a giant underwater structure. It's really an enormous thing and very beautiful to dive on. And there's lots of very gentle, sweet nurse sharks down there that you can play with.
So that looks much more like random.
That's more random, and bits
Yeah.
of it do look more random, and bits of it look highly constructed. I would not seek to claim that the Bimini Road is absolutely man-made. My claim about the Bimini Road is it's really fucking weird that it appears on a map above water,
Yes.
a map that was drawn in 1513 based on older source maps.
Now, when they found that ancient Greek computer thing, on what is that called?
The Antikythera mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, that testifies to a lost navigational skill that
Yes.
we have not taken account of before.
Incredibly complex, and it took a long time for them to figure out what that even is.
Yeah.
What do they think that is now?
It tracks the movements of the planets. It's a navigational device. It's a geared, cogged system that allows you to track the passage of time and figure out where you are. It's some kind of navigational device. It's not fully understood
And
yet.
how old is that?
I think that goes back to Greek times. I'm guessing here because the Greek times are not of great interest to me, but I'm thinking around about 500 BC.
So at least 2,000 years old, 2,000 plus, and we know that there had to be more than one of these things.
Yes, you can't have something like that without a vast effort behind it.
Yeah.
Human beings were working on creating this geared and cogged machinery that reflected the patterns in the
is that
sky.
a recreation of it?
That's a recreation of something like it. Yeah.
Can you buy one of those? It looks like you could buy that. Dude, bookmark that. We need one right there, right next to the plasticells.
So such a thing is a cultural artifact which doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It has to have a context. It has to have a background. And again, my suggestion would be perhaps a secret technology. It's very odd that very